Just give it 1 second to get onto YouTube. Okay, we should be live. All right, so today we are talking about Bitcoin. This is our second part of a two-part Speak Bitcoin Acronyms and Abbreviations stream. And the last time we did this, we talked about the first half of CBP Study Guide, and this time we're going to talk about the second half of it. But you don't need to have watched the first one in order to learn from this one. Like a lot of technology components, Bitcoin is sort of circular in terms of you need to know something to need to know something else. And so it's okay to start wherever and then work your way back. So thanks for joining us today, and check out the first stream later. But for now, let's start with intros. I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm C4's executive director, and I am joined by 3 brilliant individuals who are on our certified Bitcoin professional committee. And let's start with intros. And also, surprise, we have a new CBP committee member who we'll introduce as we get through this. So Dirk, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm Dirk Anderson, and I'm the chair of the CBP committee here at C4. Yeah, that's really all you need to know about me at this point, I think.
All right, that's enough. Just kidding. All right, Rodney.
Also, apparently I'm brilliant. I didn't know that.
It's true. You haven't heard that before? I'll make sure
confirm.
to say it more often.
I'm Rodney McInnes. I am the CRO now and AML Compliance Ninja at Outlier Compliance Group, and a member of the CBP committee.
Cool. And then our newbie today, Jeremiah Mora.
Howdy, Jeremiah Moore here. I've been in blockchain for about 7 years, from fame such as Block One, Bullish, Consensus, helped launch Lalini a bit, but I am but a mere marketing mortal. I am not among the engineering and security polymaths that this lovely crew is. So I get in where I fit in, but I'm happy to spread the word of blockchain all throughout.
I mean, but you bring up I think, an important point, Jeremiah, in that there are people in this industry, in this space, that don't need to know the really technical details, but you're a CBP, and part of that means that you understand enough about it to function professionally. When you're creating marketing material, you're not going to say something that's wildly untrue because you have the resources, you've gone through, proven yourself that you understand it. So I think sometimes there's this expectation that to be in crypto or Bitcoin, you need to know everything. And I don't think that's true. You just need to know enough to do your job and to really understand it. And also, none of us knows all of it.
I think that's really
correct.
important, Jess, actually. Yeah, that, and then that's kind of why we do these and why we have the CBP in the first place, right? The CBP does not mean you know everything about how to program mining applications and stuff like that, right? It's kind of a baseline certification that demonstrates your general knowledge of what Bitcoin is and how it works.
Yeah, cool. So with that, why don't we start talking about some of the things within Bitcoin? So like with most technologies, or I guess anything really, there's going to be acronyms and abbreviations that are thrown around, and it can make it even more difficult to keep up with the technology, or at least what people are saying. I was at an event last Friday where someone threw out a term that I didn't know, and it wasn't crypto specific, but it was in the insuring Bitcoin or Bitcoin custodians. And immediately I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What does that mean? And just for the record, no one was like, oh, idiot. Like everyone was like, oh, okay. And they explained it to me. And so I feel like that's a good thing to remember, that if you don't know what someone's saying, it's always okay to ask them what it means. And I learned something new. So it was great. All right. Our agenda today, we're going to start with, like I said, the second half of our CBP study guide, which is all about wallets, clients, and key management. And I think the best way to start is by talking about private keys. We've heard about keys, but when are we talking about private keys, and what are private keys, and what are some of the terms that are used when we're discussing private keys in general? I know that was kind of a broad thing to throw at you, but I'm going to do it anyways. Dirk, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. And we talked about keys in general, private and public key encryption in the last session of this. But we really did want to kind of touch on, I guess, especially since we're really focused on acronyms and abbreviations and those sorts of things. You will sometimes see keys abbreviated as like P key or S key for secret key. And what that's referring back to is just the keys that are being used, as we talked about last time, to sign your transaction. So your private key, again, is the key that is used to sign your transaction. When I say that I want to send a Bitcoin to Jeremiah, I write up that transaction that says that's what's going to happen. And then I sign it with my private key, and then everyone in the world, including all the miners out there, can validate that using my public key that is available to everybody. And that's how they know that I actually intended to send that Bitcoin over to Mr. Mora.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, snatch that. I think that one of the other things when we say keys, we're generally talking about the private keys. When we're talking about public keys, we don't really talk about that as much. We more say like, here's my Bitcoin address, which is derived from your public key. But most of the time when someone in crypto is saying key, they're talking about their private key, which is the access part.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Unlike when you're talking about like, sending private emails or talking about, other PKI infrastructure, public key infrastructure type stuff. In crypto, really what matters is just your secret key and like you said, Jess, right, the wallet address, which is really your public key. So.
Yeah, and we access our Bitcoin through these keys, and we use wallet software to do so. And more acronyms coming at you because we don't just say, here is my wallet software. We might say like, here's my HW, which would be, or HWW, which would be hardware wallet. Rodney, do you want to talk a little bit about the types of wallets and the abbreviations you might hear?
Certainly. So HW, like Justice says, is a hardware wallet. In that instance, you're looking at like a physical device that is used to access your Bitcoin wallet. Typically, they're on the more secure side of elements because you can use them exactly in a air-gapped fashion, so it's not directly connected to the internet, which is beneficial for certain things related to security. SW is another one, so a software wallet. That is something that you're more likely going to download onto your cell phone, probably, which, unless you've got some weird cell phone that is like one of those old indestructible Nokias, it probably is connected to the internet 24/7. Therefore, is more susceptible to being hacked or accessed by someone other than yourself. And then an HD wallet, so a hierarchical deterministic wallet, which is definitely not a mouthful, and I'm pretty impressed I spit that out first try.
I was just saying that's like the worst word ever, hierarchical.
Hierarchical.
All right, we got it though.
And so that is the way that the well, I'm suddenly drawing. I got all hyped up about what HD is and totally am blanking
I
on.
distracted you by talking about the pronunciation
I
of
blame
it.
Jessica.
Also,
totally.
that's fine. You can blame me. Also, I think where you're going with this is that we've got this ability now to derive multiple or many keys from a primary key. So before everyone had to have every single private key to every single address. And I wasn't around them, but I imagine it was kind of a cluster.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
That'd be
that's the thing,
difficult in
right?
wallet.
These three terms, the hardware wallets and software wallets, as Rodney described, are kinds of wallets, whereas HD, or the hierarchical deterministic wallet, is really part of the Bitcoin protocols that allows you to, like Jess said, derive multiple wallets under a single private key. And that's the benefit of it, right? Is that you can have a whole bunch of different wallet addresses and sign transactions out of them all with a single key instead of having to manage a massive key ring.
Yeah, and one private key is already enough. If you have to keep, I mean, most of us have more than one, but to have that many, like how it used to be for each address, especially when it's suggested you don't reuse addresses, would be extremely overwhelming.
And so that was just a perfect example for everyone watching that you don't know everything all of the time, and it's okay to forget things and relearn them as really smart people remind you what an HD wallet is when we're talking about stuff like this. So thank you for saving me.
And it's okay, like me, you had a Windows phone until Microsoft themselves stopped servicing it.
My old neighbor
No,
had
no, some
still
things
has
aren't
a flip
okay,
phone.
Jeremy.
Okay, so, and I also wanted to say this, the thing about hierarchical deterministic wallets or HD wallets is like, those are those kind of behind the scenes things that if you start with Bitcoin now, you might not know was ever an issue. So it might not seem that exciting, but it really was important at the time. And if you're like me and you have ADHD, the idea of keeping all of those keys to all of those addresses is an absolute nightmare to even think of to that degree. So like, thank God that this was a thing that happened like right before I got into Bitcoin. So I appreciate smart people that are able to figure this kind of thing out. Another thing that I think we should talk about is, so we've talked about private keys a little bit and deterministic wallets. Should we talk about WIFs,
Oh,
wallet
whiffs.
port format?
Absolutely. So a WIF is a wallet import format. This is a kind of user-friendly way of encoding a private key, and it comes with base 58 encoding. So like there's a little more data that's in there. It also has a useful checksum, so it will help you make sure that what you're writing is correct and accurate. Because if you are trying to type out, a long string of characters, it's very easy to fat finger and make a mistake. So this makes sure that there are certain elements that are required and some that aren't allowed. So the difference between a capital O and a zero and things like that.
I mean, just think about how hard it is to send a text without any typos. Like something so simple. The fat finger thing, I relate to that. Jeremiah, were you going to say something?
Just having hauntings of quadruplet checking my address before I send something.
Mm-hmm. I know it's nightmarish until you get the hang of it. And then still it can be kind of nerve-wracking, I would say.
Yeah. And the real benefit of that is that it allows you to change to move an address, a wallet address from one software wallet or hardware wallet to another, right? So that you can you have a software wallet and you want to move it to hardware, or you know have to replace a piece of hardware and you want to move it. It just simplifies that process and standardizes it, right? That's what the WIF really is a standard way of communicating that. So different wallet software would store it differently. And that was a way of saying that they could all intercommunicate with each other, so you could actually move your wallet address around if you needed to.
Yeah, which is so important, because if you have a software wallet and you give somebody the, software wallet, also known as a hot wallet, which is connected to the internet, and you give somebody your address and you end up getting a lot more funds than you anticipated, you're probably going to want to move that off. And you could either send the funds to another wallet, or you could actually, no, what I'm saying doesn't make sense.
You would
Don't do
only
that.
move them to another wallet, yeah, because
You
once
only
it's
move
been
another
online,
wallet.
it's yeah.
I
Once
caught
it's
it.
been
See,
online,
this is the thing. As I'm talking about, I'm like, don't do that. I'm glad I walked through it. Don't do what I was going to say. Send the funds to a new wallet, because this is an important lesson. Once the wallet has touched the internet, you can't freeze it. It can't become cold. If it's hot, it's hot. Okay.
Very important initialism. Don't do what Donnie Don't does.
Indeed.
And if it's hot, it's hot. That's just
Mhm. Yeah.
true.
Okay, let's talk about multi-sig or mu-sig and what that is and how that also can help with creating a safer, more secure holding system for your crypto.
Yeah, and so when we go back to the private keys, and this is one of the things, one of the reasons I really got into crypto is because I felt like it was the coolest use of applied cryptography ever, right? I mean, sure, it's one thing to like, make sure your emails are private. Sure, it's great to, protect the online transactions to, e-commerce websites. But like the way that all these pieces of crypto got put together in order to create Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptocurrency universe, I just thought was like the coolest use of it ever. And multisig kind of falls into that as well, right? The idea that you generate wallets that require multiple keys to sign them. So like I was talking earlier, the private key signs the transaction so that you can actually verify it on the blockchain using it, but you can create wallets that require multiple keys to sign them. And you can create those in all sorts of formations where you can have like a 2 of 5 or a 3 of 7 or a 6 of 90, whatever you want, sort of wallets, right? Where it takes that many, the quorum of signatures that you need is that many out of however many are actually available. And so that
Yeah.
allows you, one, to increase the security of it, like Jess said, right? So you have a wallet now that it actually requires 2 or 3 people to sign that transaction before the transaction will actually send. But on top of that, it also creates a lot of redundancy, right? Because especially in a business environment or an enterprise sort of environment, somebody goes on vacation. What if they're one of the 3 signatures that needs to be there to sign it? If you have a 3 of 3 signature, you can't sign anything until that person's back, or if they get hit by a bus, or whatever happens there. But if you have 3 of 10, right, you have 7 more people that you can choose from, and you can rotate through people, and so it creates a redundancy as well as that added layer of security on top of it by utilizing multiple signatures in the multi-sig approach.
Yeah.
I think it's
And
important.
go ahead.
I was just saying, I think it's important to highlight that doesn't necessarily need to be different people either. Like you can set up your own multi-sig wallet using different devices. You can use 3 of the exact same device. They just can't be the device. So you would need to implement in that build different components. But you can certainly set up your own multi-sig to avoid like if someone gets their hands on your hardware wallet and does some really hardcore computer stuff to get the private keys out of it, which is, I mean, we've seen evidence of it in the past happening. It's still not going to do them any good because they would need to also have at least one of your other 2 hardware wallets to kind of make that same 2 of 3 signature transaction. So it doesn't necessarily need to be different people.
Yeah, exactly. And in a practical sense, if we're talking about using a multi-sig wallet, MuSig, multi-signature, let's say Jeremiah wanted to give us, the rest of us, me, Dirk, and Rodney, a Bitcoin, but he didn't want us to have access to it until, yeah, I feel good about this, until January 2025. He could set it up in a way that Dirk has a private key, I have a private key, Rodney has a private key, but 2 of us need to sign in order to get the funds, or to be, sorry, in order to send the funds to somebody. So what he would need to do is set it up in a way where how we walked ourselves through this would be like, I couldn't just go rogue. I would have to contact Rodney or Dirk and be like, hey, Jeremiah sent us this money. In order for us to then spend it, we need to have more than one person. Therefore, because there need to be more than one signature, it's less likely for something bad to happen, because there'd have to be multiple bad actors in order to do something that is, nefarious. So
Yeah.
it sets up these extra protections. I'm not sure if that was kind of confusing how I phrased it, or did that make sense?
No, I think that made sense. And I think it's, this falls back to kind of common approaches from traditional accounting, right? For years and years and years, right? And big companies and at banks, checks over a certain amount require 2 signatures, not just 1 signature, right? Now we're talking about actually people signing the check with a pen in that case, but it's basically the technological approach to solve the same problem, but that also allows you massive more flexibility than that ever did. So
Yeah, and Jeremiah, you're going to get right on that, right?
It's already you
Already
know,
on its way?
sorry.
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
Um,
oh, we're gonna say
I
something.
was just going to take a moment here to plug also, right? So we talked about hardware wallets, software wallets, that there is, if you go search on YouTube, right? We did an entire session early last year, maybe a year ago, I don't remember, on wallets and different kinds of wallets. And in fact, we had as Rodney was inferring, one of those technological like EE type geniuses, Josh Datko, on the call with us, talking about how you hack hardware wallets and the interference mechanisms that they use and stuff like that in order to be able to extract keys out of hardware wallets. Really cool episode to watch if you haven't seen
And
it.
terrifying for those
I
of us
still have
who, yeah,
trauma from that for sure.
yeah, he was talking about how you can get into it. It's like suddenly things you feel so safe with, you're like, oh God. But it's a fascinating, he actually shows us how he does things, which I thought was really neat.
Which is good insight into like where you're going to store your Trezor or your Ledger or whatever hardware wallet you're using is, maybe don't just leave it lying around places, because it is possible for someone with a deeper level of expertise, obviously, but it is possible to extract your keys from it. So it's a consideration of, do you like, where's the safe place that you can keep it where it's not going to be accessible by anyone but yourself.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you were saying, Rodney, about, you can use multi-sig for yourself. Right, like if you even, make a 2 of 3 wallet and you have 3 devices and it takes any 2 of them and you just don't store them together, right? You don't store them right next to each other. So obviously not the sort of thing that is effective for daily transactions, but for storing your long-term savings and that sort of thing can be super, super valuable.
Yeah, and we talked about this in terms of how this is like the ways we access cryptocurrency and these security benefits have increased over time to make things easier, to make things safer. And I think that brings us to our next point, where when Bitcoin, were you going to say something else?
Actually, one other thing I was meant to mention there around multisig is that multisig is not necessarily inherent in all blockchains. It's one of those things that was added in later with Bitcoin, wasn't part of the original architecture, and it's just built into Bitcoin and a lot of the Bitcoin type blockchains like Litecoin and stuff. Ethereum doesn't inherently have multi-sig. You have to write smart contracts to do it for you. So you can do it, do the same thing, but it is just one of those things to consider, that it's not necessarily something that's just automatically available for all cryptos.
It's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but how was it written in? Like, how was it added? I guess I didn't realize that it wasn't always
Yeah, it's one of the BIPs.
protocol.
And I don't remember which one that basically created the support for it. And then it was a matter of, yeah, just the wallet generation, address
Okay, because
generation.
BIP 39 is HD, I think, hierarchical deterministic. And if you don't know what a BIP is, we talked about it in our last one. It's a Bitcoin improvement proposal, which is how things get added to Bitcoin to make improvements, or not. The committee or the community votes on whether or not things should be added to the network. So actually, let's talk about something else that was added to the network. So originally, when Bitcoin started, if you were going to make a transaction, you had to have a full copy of the Bitcoin blockchain, and that is no longer the case. And that has happened through something called SPV. Yeah, you know me. I did a different rap last time. I feel like this is just like carrying on. So sorry about that. But what is SPV other than a horrible song that I just created?
Uh, So SPV is the simplified payment verification. It's actually part of the original Bitcoin standard. It's right here. It's section 8 of the original white paper. But it is one of those things that, so the way SPV works, it doesn't settle, right? So there you don't have the same level of assuredness that that a particular Bitcoin has not been, or some sats have not been double spent, right? Meaning that somebody had already used them and then uses them again for another transaction. SPV is conceptually, it's almost kind of like layer 2, like Lightning or something like that, which I know we haven't talked about yet, but we will. but the idea is that it allows for direct peer-to-peer transaction authentication. So if I'm, conducting a transaction and we don't have time for settlement, maybe we're offline. It's a mechanism for that. But again, yeah, it's not one of those things that, at least in my experience and the way that I've worked with Bitcoin, I've actually ever run across in the real world. But it is one of those things that was actually thought about in the very beginning.
Can I just point out how important it is to have a committee? Because everything what I just said about it not being part of the original network, and you pointing out it absolutely was. There's like 10 parts and then the intro and conclusion of the Bitcoin white paper. And SPV is literally one of the sections. So it's good to like kind of keep coming back to this because it's easy to forget things when there's so much information. So SPV is simplified payment verification. All right, let's get into some kind of, I think, like fun terms people have probably heard of, even if you're not super technical or technical at all. Let's talk about HODL. Dang it, I always say it wrong. I always say HODL every time. Rodney, what's HODL mean?
Who says it's HODL versus like it's based off of hold? So
Okay,
in
thank you.
that
I am
sense,
right.
HODL would make sense. I think if you pronounced it phonetically, it would be HODL, but I find different jurisdictions pronounce it differently.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
well, I'm always told I'm wrong, so now I've got a
Yeah,
little
but
feather in my
but you're a
cap.
Canadian, so of course you're going to say rooter instead. So
rude, period. Wow, called
I'm
out
not
just
really
like
making
that.
fun of
This
Canadians. I
is
love
getting
Canadians, especially Rodney.
This is a wild live stream here.
It
Okay.
is. I think
DL.
I think one of the questions when someone tells you that you're wrong with stuff like that is like, kind of the don't trust verify, which is, one of the credos of Bitcoin. So in that instance, if you're going to say that I'm wrong, prove it.
Yeah, don't trust verify with Rodney, who's the only one who's told me that I can say modal. So all right, I'm on board, Rodney.
So originally, a user on the Bitcoin Talk forum in December 2013 posted something that was titled in all caps, I am hodling. So we're hodling, HDLING. And basically at the time, it was them saying that, which is like, frankly, really good advice. I suck at trading, so I'm just going to hold on to my Bitcoin and let it do its own thing without trying to make more Bitcoin, because that is a recipe for not having more Bitcoin and having less Bitcoin. So to hodl or to hodl is to hold Bitcoin, and it's just a spelling mistake. Now, if you've gotten into Bitcoin in the last, I don't even know when it changed, but you will hear folks talking about holding on for dear life. And this seems more of a mainstream kind of media coverage on that, where it's kind of morphed. But the original commentary started around a Bitcoin Talk forum post, but you will see holding on for dear life, which kind of supports the I'm just going to hold on to Bitcoin no matter what happens. So neither are
you'll see
right.
it on like hats and T-shirts and all over the place, right? Because because those people are just committed to the long. They're in Bitcoin for the long run, right?
Correct. And then because of that original typo, you see some other kind of typos that have come into common ground in the space. So biddle, or which I don't know how you would pronounce that any differently, but it's build with the D and the L switched at the end. Bweedle, I guess.
Boodle.
But it's the same kind of play on the original, the original spelling mistakes. And I mean, we've seen companies kind of doing the same thing. So there's a company in the kind of the lending space, and what they did is they took the N and the D and switched them so they're leaden, and things like that. So it's kind of interesting to see kind of some of the play and how these things morph over years, where it started out as just a harmless typo that wildly took off and morphed into something totally different before getting different letters attached to it, regardless of the meaning not really changing. So it's very interesting to see.
Well, I think one
Yeah,
of
I think
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
No, please.
Well, from the perspective of the marketing department, things like that, or early on in my blockchain career, were kind of like frowned upon by, colleagues in the space of like using that speak, because a lot of people were trying to garner favor with governments or Wall Street or London. And over time, it's just been adopted by everyone, corporations, just as Rodney spoke to. And it is funny to see them go from harmless mistakes, how most slang, whether it's, in real life or on the internet, comes about, into becoming accepted and adopted by all, players in the scene. And then people ascribing their own ideas of what it means, like to hold on for dear life. It's like, well, now it's an acronym, and it's not just a weird, quirk of the community. So it can be easy to be deceived if you're roaming around on Reddit or X Twitter, and you see something that looks like it's probably an initialism or acronym, but in fact, it's just, community slang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the fun things about Bitcoin, but it's also one of the challenging things, because you go to Reddit or wherever and you're looking at something and you see these words and like they really just meant hold, but then the community, which I think is really fun, has turned words into something else or typos into something else. And as it gets adopted, it's hard to keep up with these different things to make sure that you understand why we're here. Yeah. So yeah, we talked about hodl, biddle. Another thing is rect, and I'm actually going to type it into the chat because it is spelled R-E-K-T, and that's the same thing where it's not really an abbreviation or an acronym, but it's being used instead of saying like W-R-E-C-K-E-D. It's if you put in a bunch of money and you lost it. So that generally isn't so much what people say in Bitcoin, but more for altcoins. I think I hear that a lot more, although sometimes too, I guess if you bought at 73 and now I don't know what it's at today, but somewhere in the 60s.
60.
Yeah. You might feel like you got wrecked, although it depends on how much you put in, what your expectations were, and all of that. But related to the word wrecked is the word rug pull, which basically means when, the rug's pulled out from under you after you've put money into something and then you find out that it is in fact a scam, or all of the money's been gone, leaves because they didn't have good private key management, whatever it is. It's if you have the rug pulled out from under you because you didn't do your due diligence and make sure that what it is that you invested in or purchased is actually something that is going to be around for the long haul. So you have to be careful when you're investing in anything that's speculative. And we don't see Bitcoin as something we should speculate about. This is more about educating, but I do think it's important to recognize that there are different ways to be involved with cryptocurrency in a speculative fashion. And you really have to only put in what you can afford to put in and be careful and safe about it. So that's my lecture for the day. All right. So how do we know?
I like to think about rect is it's just a really short way of writing the word rect properly, followed by about 10 exclamation points, right? Rect is like, it's just extreme, right? It's like you were completely destroyed. You lost everything. Rect is what happened, during the Wall Street crash in 1929. When was it? Oh my God, my history is failing me.
Okay,
where people were wrecked, and so they were jumping out of windows, right? That's the idea behind wrecked, is that you lost absolutely everything. A lot of people were wrecked by FTX. That's using it in a sentence, right?
Yeah.
It can take a lot of gumption and self-assuredness to admit when you have been wrecked.
Yeah.
But that's how you get more stuff and you prevent the next wreck from occurring.
Yeah, someone once told me you're not really into crypto if you haven't been wrecked before. So I guess I'm not into crypto because I haven't made any terrible investments. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. Okay, but so how do you avoid this? How do you make sure you're not going to get wrecked? How do you DYOR?
That's
awesome
it.
segue.
DYOR. Nice segue.
You check yourself before you wreck yourself,
DYOR, you'll see a lot around as well. And some of this stuff bleeds back and forth between, kind of some of the traditional finance and crypto finance. But obviously, because there's so much more speculation, and we're still kind of the Wild West a little bit, and uh, um, uh, building out the infrastructure for the same level or appropriate level of scrutiny and maturity for around crypto. DYOR is do your own research, right? So before you go and put money into something, actually research it, actually look into it, actually understand it. And that's part of the reason that we exist as an entity, is to help educate. But before you go and put any significant amount of money, and significant is always a relative term, right? Whatever's significant to you, into anything, make sure that you've actually researched it and actually understand it, and know if you're talking about a crypto project, you need to know how it works, as well as who's behind it, and what the track record there is. And yeah, just the same thing you would do to put, if a family member came to you and asked you to invest in a laundromat or anything else, right? You'd want to know what kind of experience they have running a laundromat, and how many machines are they going to have, and where's it located, and you got to do your own research.
What
Yeah,
kind of
borrow
laundry?
from
Like
to borrow from one
money
of
laundromat? Sorry.
crypto's biggest detractors, Warren Buffett. I don't invest in anything I don't understand. So if you'd like to get in the game, it's just a couple books you got to read, a couple conversations at a coffee shop with friends that do know, or signing up for the CPB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So is that just your two sats about it, Dirk? I know that's like your favorite
I think
one.
it's my two sats, and no, that's one of those things I would say is kind of a truism, as opposed to my two sats. So we talked again last month about Satoshis. Sats, named after the anonymous founder or creator of Bitcoin, but also referring to the smallest denomination of Bitcoin. And so this is just, again, a co-opting of the standard phrase, my 2 cents, right? What are your 2 cents? That's my 2 cents. And in the crypto world, or the Bitcoin world at least, that's going to be my two sats.
And you can have a lot of sats, but you can only have a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin. That wasn't as good of a transition, but I do want us to point out that there is a limited supply of Bitcoin. You'll hear the phrase 21 million thrown around, and that's just to talk about how there's not never-ending supply of Bitcoin. Okay. Oh, this is a fun one. WAGME. Sounds weird. I'm gonna have to write it into the chat, because I don't think I've said that out loud before, maybe.
Because it's not a Japanese beef.
It's generally written, now that I'm saying it. Okay, but it stands for "we are gonna make it." So basically it's like hype chat, or there's also "not gonna make it." But the idea is people like trying to push forward their project and be positive about it. And that's kind of one of the things I think is really fun about Bitcoin and crypto, is people being positive and pushing things forward. This is also why you need to do your own research, because people can get really hyped up about something. And from a marketing perspective, they might have great marketers, but you need to know whether or not the product itself is actually something that you would want to be involved in. Is it an exchange you'd want to use, and whatnot? So let's talk about exchanges and how do you actually use Bitcoin? So there's all different ways to participate in Bitcoin commerce. And one of them is with exchanges, like I just said, but there's something called OTC. And Rodney, do you want to talk to us a little bit about Bitcoin commerce from that perspective, OTC? And then we've got some other terms to toss in as well.
So OTC is considered over the counter. And when you're looking at, say, traditional kind of foreign exchange over the counter transactions, it's directly with the exchange itself. There's no middleman, there's no liquidity provider. Like, that's all happening kind of behind the scenes. And a lot of what you hear when you talk about or hear about OTC transactions is it's usually stuff that is done kind of off the book, so to speak. So like it's not any kind of subterfuge or anything like that. It is two people agreeing to be like, Jeremiah is clearly apparently stacked with Bitcoin, as we've been talking about. He's giving it away to everyone. So Dirk, sorry, I'm going to talk to Dirk about it. In that I'm going to ask Dirk. I've recently committed some money. I've got $500,000. I want to buy some Bitcoin, but I don't want to go to an exchange. I just want to buy it directly from you. That would be more of an OTC transaction because it's not going to be kind of captured in the pricing algorithms that are running within the exchanges and between exchanges and things like that. So when you hear about massive amounts of Bitcoin being exchanged sometime, people talk about it being done over the counter, and that has less to do on the exchange or on the price, sorry, of Bitcoin. You're hearing a lot about that currently with the Mt. Gox kind of payout that's been happening, where the funds are being sent not OTC. And so there's been a lot of selling, which has had some downward pressure on price. Like these are all things I'm reading. I know nothing about trading or pricing or anything like that, but there's been complaints about why they're selling it into the market like that because it's so much Bitcoin that it is putting a lot of downward pressure on pricing and stuff like that. So OTC is a way to exchange Bitcoin with something beyond just another person, while not directly affecting the price when it comes to a large scale transaction.
Yeah, and you can do crypto to crypto, so Bitcoin to something else, or fiat to Bitcoin. There's lots of different options. If you were to use a exchange or a company in order to do this, you would need to share information. So we have our KYC AML ninja here, Rodney McInnes. So Rodney, will you share with us about, oh God, about what it is, what is AML? Why are you a ninja? What is KYC?
Oh, everyone's favorite topic, favorite things to do, giving away private information to businesses. So AML is anti-money laundering. That is legislation that exists in a large swath of the world at this point, that is designed to prevent, detect, and deter money laundering within each jurisdiction. Money laundering being the taking the proceeds of crime, obfuscating the origin of it to be able to present it as legitimate earned money. So the legislation is in place to kind of make that difficult. KYC is another term that gets thrown around a lot, which is know your customer or know your client, depending on the sectors you're in. And that is, when you go into your bank and they ask you for, ew, gross, I'm not going to use that example. That's when you're going to an exchange, and they ask you for your ID, your name, address, date of birth, phone numbers, things like that. And that process is called the KYC process, or the know your customer process. The idea of that is to have an understanding of who you're dealing with, but also create kind of a baseline to what you should be expecting from that customer, and where you see something beyond the norm, or deviations from expected or similar previous transactions. It helps kind of throw a flag that says, hey, this is outside of the normal for this customer. Is there something happening here? Is it still this customer? Is it now someone else? And things like that. So that is where that language comes from.
Thank
See,
you.
super exciting. Everyone's not asleep right now. You're welcome.
It might not be the most exciting and fun thing to talk about, but it is extremely important to know about and to understand. So yes, we're not going to throw a party of excitement, but also if you don't understand this, it can be extremely problematic. So it is definitely something to be aware of for sure.
Come hang out with Outlier. We'll throw a party and have AML
You guys have
included
good,
somehow.
you guys have good parties, so there. All right. Something most people have probably heard about if you are more into the investment side of things rather than the tech side of things is ATH, which is all-time high. Anybody know what the all-time high was and when? Yes, sir.
It was March 2024, and the amount was $73,738.
Yeah. All
And I
right.
only know that because I can read your notes.
I'll give it to you anyways.
See, compliance people are the worst.
So on our CBP exams, you don't need to know anything about price. That's definitely not our focus. But to pretend like the price doesn't matter would be ridiculous. People invest in this. Some people have lost a lot of money off of it. It is a currency that is used, invested in, whatever you want to say about it, but it does have wild fluctuations. And it would be, I think, a disservice to everyone in the industry to pretend like that doesn't happen. And so it has gone as high as above 73,000 USD. It has gone obviously much lower. It started much lower, but it kind of goes back and forth. And so it's just something to be aware of. And I think also don't buy into the hype. And hopefully if you're getting crypto or if you're buying or exchanging for Bitcoin, you're aware of the fluctuations and kind of have that in the back of your mind when you're using it.
I'm just in it for the
I think
tech part.
that instead of referring to ourselves as feeling like $1 million whenever we're ecstatic, we should say I feel like $73,738.
Yeah. For like that in that second before it dropped back down again.
And I think it's really important to remember, I always go back to the, what was it, 2022 quote, I think, by Michael Saylor, which is that for the rest of his life, he'll be buying at the top because it's always eventually going to go up. So
I mean, I
not to be afraid
remember
of the all-time high.
I remember when someone was appalled at, I knew somebody who bought at 19K and people were like, why are you doing it now? And then look at it now. That person has tripled their holding.
Even when you figure we've fallen back 13,000 from the all-time high, right? Yeah. So
yeah, assuming that it does go back up, which I think we're all believers on this call, but also like if you need that money right away and you put it in at the all-time high and you need it now, you're gonna have lost a significant amount of money. So it really is about being smart about your investments, but I think that's anywhere in life.
yeah.
Okay, so let's say you were sending Bitcoin when it was at its all-time high. It's at over $73,000 and you're sending something and your transaction is not being picked up and put into the mempool and being added to the blockchain. What can you do about this?
Right. And so, yeah, this happens, and it's not even necessarily the all-time high or like at like high prices, but when there's really high volume for whatever reason, right? When there's really high volume, the fees for the network, right? The fees that get paid to the miners fluctuate. And sometimes what'll happen in a high volume situation, because there's a maximum amount of space in each Bitcoin or in each Bitcoin network block on the blockchain for holding transactions. What will happen is the miners will look for transactions that have higher fees associated with them, right? They're either larger transactions or somebody, you can specify the fee when you create the transaction you're sending. And most wallets support this to some degree. Sometimes they'll just have kind of like a high, middle, low sort of setting. But what'll happen is your transaction might sit there in the mempool, not getting picked up by any of the miners while they're processing all these other transactions. And so one of the things that was done, it was actually initially implemented when Satoshi was still, active in the online chat and Twitter and stuff like that around Bitcoin. But it didn't really become popular because people were worried about it being abused until a few years later, like 2014, 2015, I think. You can, because when you submit a transaction, it's signed with your private key. That makes that transaction immutable, right? You can't change anything in that because it'll change the signature. So what this did was it modified the transaction process so that you can actually update the fee that you're willing to pay for your transaction in order to get it processed. So again, you submit a transaction and it's sitting there, and not getting picked up because right after you submitted it, fees went up or something like that. and you can actually go in and replace the fee on an existing transaction, rewrite the transaction so it has a higher fee in the hopes that it will then get picked up and actually execute and be settled.
That was a really good explanation of how RBF replaced by fee works. We've got one more thing we're going to talk about before we close out, and it's an important one. If you've ever heard anyone say LN or Lightning, they're talking about the Lightning Network. And what the Lightning Network is a second layer scaling solution that's on the Bitcoin blockchain. And it works as micropayments that are sent back and forth through an open channel. And then the channel is closed, and then it's added to the Bitcoin blockchain. What does that mean? Well, join us for our next live stream where we actually go through the Lightning Network in a more detailed way and make sure that you understand how it works. I think there's a lot of misconception that Lightning is its own blockchain, and it's not. It's on the Bitcoin network, and the funds happen off chain and then are added to it, but it's pretty interesting how it works. And just to understand it at a basic level, I think is very important and will take more than the few minutes we have left. So we're going to do a follow-up where we talk about the Lightning Network exclusively and walk you through how it works and, you know, what's happening behind the scenes. And we'll probably have somebody who is a specialist or an expert in Lightning Network technology and bolts the basics of the Lightning technology join us, and stay tuned for who it is. But yeah, I think that that's about it for what we wanted to bring up with acronyms and abbreviations, and we will talk about LN Lightning Network next time. Anything else anybody wanted to add about anything we've talked about today?
I'd just like to say once again, welcome to Jeremiah. We're super happy to have you on the committee.
I'm Susie.
Yep.
Super.
Very excited.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go see a doctor about it,
we're
but I'm still
stupidal.
soupy currently.
We're stupidal happy.
And then Rodney, I know you're on very little sleep, so thank you for joining us today, even though you're very tired today. So I appreciate you guys, as always, donating your time to C4 and helping spread the word about how Bitcoin actually works. So thank you guys for being here, and we will see you all next time. And thank you.